Yeah, when it comes to making positive changes in your life, I think people get a little too serious. They treat it like they're trying to get this very exact result, and they have this fully formed idea of exactly how that should work. And I think they need to treat it like an experiment because that's what's worked for me. Each time that I've made a positive change in my life, it's been gradual. And the last couple years, I've made a lot of positive changes and I continue to make them. And by making them gradually, I feel like I'm working them into a system and building a system out of them rather than just being like doing this black and white, almost like a New Year's resolution type thing, which I think New Year's resolutions and those sorts of attitudes are mocked for good reason, and there's a reason why they don't really work for many people. Because I've known a lot of people who do that, like I'm going to the gym now, I'm doing this now, and it doesn't work for them. It doesn't work for most of them. Because I think you have to treat it like an experiment once again, and that goes for mental and physical activities. It goes for a lot of things, uh, but mentally for me, I'm just an inherently judgmental person. I was born that way, born this way, born this way, born negative, and that's what the Lady Gaga song's about. Gaga, that's what that song was about. It wasn't about whatever else, whatever it was about. It was about being negative. No, it wasn't. But born this way. I do feel like I was born inherently judgmental. I didn't grow up in a judgmental household. The older people in my house weren't judgmental, but I do believe there's a genetic component. My dad is a very negative and judgmental guy, and I don't say that with any criticism. I say it with because I relate. I think we're very similar in that way. And I saw him growing up, even though I didn't live with him, but I don't feel like he passed that on to me. I don't feel like he taught it to me. I feel like I was born with that in me. And I think that some people are just born more negative or more judgmental. And when I was younger, I would judge people for the oddest reasons. There were times where because I was quiet in a situation or because like I have a serious mug, that people would think I was judging them when I really wasn't. But there were a lot of situations where I was. And one of the decisions I made in the last couple of years was to stop being that way. And I kind of went back and forth with it. I feel like it was another thing that was gradual, but I don't feel like I ever made that decision because I'd always heard those cliches about, making the decision to be positive. And if it's a cliche and if I hear the wrong person saying it, I reject it. And I still kind of do that. But, especially with anything motivational or construed as positive. I didn't like the people who were saying it. Therefore, how could I like what they're saying? And you have to learn things for yourself. You have to have your own epiphanies, and usually an epiphany isn't some brand new idea that you ripped out of the cosmic, the greater cosmic. I don't even know. You didn't rip it out of the universe, yourself. You're not grabbing something entirely new. Often epiphanies are things that are cliche. They are things that you never thought you would think or say to yourself, but you've heard other people say them a million times and you rejected them, especially if you're like me. So deciding not to judge people. When I first finally really made a decision to try not to do that, I was like, I'm going to try a little experiment and see how I feel. Because there's the idea that when you do that, you're not poisoning them, you're poisoning yourself. I mean, I think if you do poison yourself, you are ultimately poisoning those around you, even just a little bit. Even if you keep it to yourself, it spreads in its own way. But you know, I, I always kind of rejected that idea, that whole thing about you're poisoning yourself when you judge people. I would hear that and I would say, no way. There's no way that I'm hurting myself by being critical, by being judgmental. And that's the thing too, is sometimes you think you're just being critical when you're really kind of going a little too far and you're talking way too much shit and you're thinking way too much shit. And once again, it's for strange reasons too. It's not like you're doing this to people who truly deserve it, because some people do truly deserve to be judged. There is behavior that people do that I think deserves judgment. Whether or not it's a good idea to actually judge them is another story, because I think just because there are people who deserve judgment doesn't mean that you do need to judge them. That's a whole other thing. But for me, it was making a decision, like when I was driving, because this is the sort of judgments I would have would be like if I was driving down the street and I saw somebody on the sidewalk who like fit some who I felt like maybe was following some kind of like weird micro trend in like art or music. I would see them and I would just hate. I would just feel that hate and let that hate like consume me for a moment. Uh, and I think that was always an issue with me is I was way more judgmental of people who were, I don't want to say similar to me because I'm not talking about art and music that was necessarily stuff I liked, but if it was something that was somehow like in the grand scheme of things closer to me than it was farther away. It's not like I would see somebody who was like a gangster, like some like white, wannabe gangster, and like I wouldn't feel that hate toward them, even though ultimately they were a much maybe not. Maybe they are closer to me. No, but really, even though they were much farther away from me, I would be much less likely to feel that hate for them. Whereas somebody who's like, into some artsy bullshit, even if I don't like it, because that's closer to me in some weird way, I would hate on it. And I don't feel like I was projecting self-hatred onto them. I've done a lot of thinking on that, and I really don't feel that was the case. I think it's this weird, I don't even know how to explain where it comes from, only that it existed. And so I would have a tendency to see that person, and especially in a town like this, Olympia, you see a lot of that, and you're just like, what is that person doing? And I would feel that hatred for them for some reason. And I made a decision to stop doing that in recent years, and I really did have to make a decision not to do it. And now I can honestly say, and this has been true for long enough to where I feel like it's a new discipline, or not. It's not even a discipline. It's not something I have to practice. It's something that just comes naturally. I don't judge people. Uh, Not universally. I do judge people, but I don't judge people in circumstances like that. I don't judge them for petty, vague reasons like I used to. I do see them and I might think, oh, look at that person. Oh, look at that person doing that thing that other people do that I don't like or don't understand. I do think that, but that's all it is. It's just that. It doesn't get deeper than that, and I feel better. I like it's basically like this weird, like it's almost like seeing a bird in the woods. It's like that's a woodpecker. That's kind of like what I would compare it to. You know, if you're not a judgmental person too, if you've never gone through that weird judgment in your life, if you never come from that place, you can't really understand this. And good for you. If you're just naturally a non-judgmental person, then I really do mean good for you, because you have an advantage. And you might not realize it, but you do. You have a step up on people whose natural tendency is to just be a hater. That term. You don't hear that term as much anymore. You were hearing it like so much for years. You don't hear it much anymore. Therefore, I'm going to start using it now. No, but yeah. So mentally, that's just one example. I mean, I've done a lot of mental reprogramming that's along those lines, because judgment wasn't that big of a thing in my life. Like, I mean, those moments it did happen, but I just got to a point where I was sick of doing that. But there were a lot of other negative symptoms that were all swirling around inside of me, and with the reprogramming, I treated it like an experiment. I originally said, I'm going to try not doing that and thinking something better, or thinking nothing, and see what happens. And if I don't feel better, well, then I can always go back down. I know where that road goes. I know how to get there. So I can always go back. And even now, I can do that. Sometimes it's good to go back. Sometimes it's good to be that negative person. It's good to have access to that. I think it's a resource, because I think I've talked a lot about negativity. I know on the podcast, at least the School Night podcast, and I think negativity is a great resource, and very creative, constructive things can come from a very deep, dark, negative place. So I think it's important to hold on to negativity as a resource and not just throw it all out. Uh, but I do feel better in not going there all the time. I do feel better in not letting that just take hold of me in a moment. I like not being gripped by it. But I think the experiment thing is a good attitude to take, because that way you're not putting too much pressure on yourself. You're sort of like, well, here's what I'm going to do. And the idea is that I will feel better. But I'm just going to treat it like this. And that way, if I can't maintain it, like, because that's the other thing too, is let's say that you reprogram your brain and you do feel better, but you find it extremely difficult to maintain. Maybe you're not able to reprogram yourself. Maybe you find that tendency is too strong in you. And if you treat it like an experiment and you do revert back to that, you at least won't beat yourself up too much if you have that kind of experimental attitude. Whereas if you put a ton of pressure on yourself and you're like, this is exactly what's going to happen, and I'm going to have to stick to this, and blah, 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 you're really going to set yourself up for, you're going to be in an even worse place, because you will have failed yourself. You will have failed something that was an experiment, but you didn't tell yourself it was an experiment. So you're basically screwing yourself over, and you're worse off than you were to begin with when you were just hating, because you're a failure and you're a hater. But I think where it is especially true, and where I see a lot of people fail, is with physical health changes. It's that sort of, once again, the New Year's resolution mindset where, like, I got my gym membership, I got my, all my health foods, and I'm going to do better now. I'm going to do better, and not going to quit smoking, but do everything else. No, I see that a lot, and there's this intense pressure where someone's just, they're going to do it. I'm going to do it. And they make an announcement. You see that on social media, like, I've decided I'm going to get in shape, and a study came out, and it makes total sense. This study just clicked with me, where when people make those announcements and people basically congratulate them for doing something that they haven't done yet, and the person gets those endorphins or whatever it is, they get a rush from being congratulated or encouraged, and so psychologically they feel like they've already accomplished it when all they've done is make the announcement. Whereas if they start doing it and they don't make the announcement and people congratulate them, it's going to feel immensely better, because if people notice changes in you, that's the best thing of all. If someone notices it on their own without you having to shove it down their throat, especially before you've even done it, it's going to be better for you overall. And you're going to, once again, and that way too, if you do fail at doing what you set out to do, it's going to feel way better to fail having told nobody that you were trying to do it than if you made some big announcement. But yeah, I think you should treat, making physical, bodily health changes, positive changes to your routine, and the mental and physical is so closely linked. It really, I mean, I wouldn't even say closely linked at this point. To me, I think they are one and the same. I truly believe, I truly believe that they're one and the same, and there's really no separation from them. And to make them separate is kind of a weird thing to do. Shows you like where we're at as creatures, as humans, the fact that we have to separate those, that we've gone this far down the road, that we split our mental and physical existence. But in terms of treating, physical stuff like an experiment, that's what I've done. And I can honestly say I'm the healthiest I've ever been. And I'm not patting myself on the back. I'm not resting on my laurels, because every day I try to get a little better and I try to do something just a little bit differently. But I am at a point where I feel like my discipline is at a certain peak, and it feels great. It really feels, people who are disciplined, you never really hear them complain about it. Yeah, when someone's, forcing you to do something, even if it's good for you, you'll complain about it. When it's your football coach, telling you to like run an extra lap or whatever, he he's forcing you to do it, and whether you understand the benefit and accept the coach's order or not, it's not you're not doing it because of your own discipline. You're doing it because the coach is the one disciplining you. But when it's your own discipline, when it's you who decide, when you're on a run or a walk or something, and you decide, I'm going to do that extra lap, and you build that into your routine, that is discipline. That is self-discipline. And you don't hear people who are self-disciplined ever say, I feel worse for being disciplined. Saying disciplined sounds weird because we think of that as a punishment. But there's a difference between being, disciplined yourself and punishing yourself. Because a lot of people see it that way. A lot of people who are kind of habitually lazy and have issues surrounding motivation see self-discipline as self-punishment, and they're really not the same thing at all. If you listen to the Night School podcast I do, not every night's a school night, but I do these night schools, which are about a half hour long, and they're really just stream of consciousness, just throwing it out there, and they're barely cohesive, but they're just something I feel the need to do, and I'd like to make them more cohesive, because these, believe it or not, are more cohesive than these and those. But I did one on the difference between fantasy and delusion, and something I would like to delve into more with these different videos and podcasts is the difference between similar concepts that are often confused for one another. And I won't go into it, but I recommend check out the Night School on fantasy and delusion. That one is actually pretty clear-headed. I feel like that's one of my better ones, my more cohesive night schools. Because fantasy and delusion are often confused for one another, and I think discipline and punishment are often confused for each other, because you hear about somebody being disciplined by somebody, and that's the same thing as a punishment. Like a student who misbehaves, the teacher disciplined them. But I think we should not use the word discipline that way. There's some Navy SEAL guy, and I don't even know his name, but I saw an interview with him, and he said that discipline equals freedom, and that was an epiphany for me. The more disciplined I am, the more free I feel, because everything else outside of the acts of discipline really are just total freedom. And they feel that way, and you feel that much more free when you're doing them, when you've also done, when you've maintained the other aspects of your life that are disciplined. But to get back to the original point in this, is that you have to treat physical and changes like an experiment. I mentioned, not judging as an experiment to see how I'd feel. Well, I've done that physically over the last 2 years in particular. During my 20s, I was always kind of breaking even. I got in pretty good shape when I was around 20 or 21. I was a heavy fat kid. And I was on the fatter side of fat, or let's put it this way. I was on the fat side. I wasn't like obese, but I was definitely fat. I was not chubby. I was fat. And I dropped a bunch of weight around 20, 21, somewhere around there. But then throughout the rest of my 20s, I was always kind of either breaking even, or there was like, depending on the drinking, like if there was, once I started drinking heavily, I'd get bloated, and then I'd get back to more of an average look, and then I'd bloat again, and it'd be this kind of up and down thing where I never really got fat again, but I was always kind of like bloating and unbloating. And just kind of this like, and I walked a lot. I did a lot of hiking and walking, and that was my only form of exercise. And I did do a lot of it. So, but I was always just kind of breaking even. And then getting into my 30s, though, the last couple years, I really have taken health a lot more seriously. But it's been gradual, and I've treated it all like an experiment, and that's why I feel like it's been a success because I've added pieces here and there. Starting out, it was well, I've been walking a ton, for the my entire adult life. Well, what if I tried running a little bit? What if I tried just jogging as part of my run or as part of my walk? I would go on a hike and I'd be like, well, what if I just ran up this hill and then ran for about 10 minutes? So I started out that way rather than just being like, I'm a runner now. I have to be a runner and I'm going to force myself to run. I just was like, well, what if I did this? I wonder how I'd feel. I wonder what the results would be. And I found that I loved it. I started out running up hills. I found that because I used to do that when I was just a hiker, is I would run up steep hills because I found it felt easier rather than like uh just like taking these big winded steps. It was like, I'm gonna get winded anyway. I might as well just run up this. So I just kept that up and then became a runner. And then with running too, that was gradual, like building up. As anybody should do. You shouldn't overdo it with something like that where you can get injured pretty badly if you do it wrong. But I did treat it like an experiment, and I was like, I feel better. And once again, thinking back, like I had a friend who he was a guy I knew through underground music who was from my hometown, and we jammed together when I was still in high school, and like just have maintained contact. His name's Aaron, and we've been friends online and we haven't seen each other in years. But I saw that he had gotten really into running, and I was like, he looks like he feels great. And the way he talks about that, like, once again, it's like someone who's disciplined. You don't hear people who run regularly tell you they feel worse for it. Yeah, you can fuck up your legs, you can injure yourself, but in terms of your mental feeling, your overall physical health, nobody who runs will tell you that they feel worse for it. And I remember just thinking, he looks like that looks really satisfying. That looks more satisfying than just hiking. And obviously, there's a benefit to like strolling through the woods and like taking it all in. But I just mean in terms of the physical effect. And so that kind of like brought me into running. And then I started like just lifting small weights. And I still only lift like whatever hand weights, whatever the fuck you call them, free weights. And I've built up to like slightly heavier ones and just doing more reps and that kind of thing. So I'm not some major, weightlifter or anything, but that was another experiment. I had tried doing a little bit of that about, I don't know, maybe when I was in my mid 20s, 24, 25, and I did it for a couple months, but didn't really do it regularly and just didn't build up any kind of discipline and had no motivation to keep it up. So it really didn't count. But once I actually started doing it regularly in the last couple of years, I found once again that I feel substantially better. But I treated it like an experiment. It wasn't like I got my gym membership and, this is my new life now. This is my new life now. This is my now life. And I'm going to do it. And then I didn't do it. It was just this thing where like, I'm just going to try doing this. And I'm going to start out slow. And I'm going to, just treat it like an experiment and see how I feel. And if I don't want to keep doing it or whatever, well, then it's just an experiment that didn't work out. And for me though, the hard, that stuff, I don't know. I've always been like pretty, since originally getting into shape when I was around 20, I found that, physical stuff isn't a struggle for me. Once I make my mind up to do it, I do it. But what's always been a major struggle for me is diet. And when I've gone through phases of smoking a lot of weed, that's obviously a major issue. Here, I'll plug yet another podcast, but my Every Night's a School Night podcast, episode 47, which I did on 420, I talk about this, so I recommend listening to that. But munchies are a fact. I don't believe in the other weed stereotypes. I don't believe in a lot of like the lazy stoner, because I'm a productive person whether I'm smoking weed or not, and I find that I work out when I'm smoking weed. I can do virtually anything with as much motivation as I want when I smoke weed, and I don't have the stoner mindset. just peace, love, and sitting on the couch, man. But munchies are an absolute fact in my experience. There's no avoiding that just insatiable hunger that comes. It's not hunger. It's just this compulsion to eat. And again, listen to the episode 47 of Every Night's a School Night for more about the munchies. But the munchies are a fact. So one reason I'm not smoking weed right now is because it really fucks with my diet, because I will binge eat. It's not a matter of when, it's I will. And even if it takes me a couple days after like starting smoking weed again, I will eventually be like scooping peanut butter out of the bottom of the jar with one finger while like throwing chocolate chips in my mouth with the other. I will do that. That's one thing, but also just growing up when I was young, you think about, you'll see like two parents with a kid in a restaurant just begging their kid to eat something, just to even eat, even if it's not healthy. Sometimes kids are just like, I'm not eating. And you'll see two parents, both mom and dad begging their kid to eat, and the kid won't do it. And then you throw in like healthy food, and the kid will just, that's an even bigger struggle. And at that point, the parents are just like, just give him a piece of pizza. So you can imagine what it's like growing up with a single mom, and someone as stubborn as me as a kid, especially. It's like I was not gonna. I remember her like trying to bargain with me to eat broccoli and to do this and that, and I just was not having it. I feel bad for any single mom with a son, because, especially one who's as headstrong as I was, because for me it was like, no, I just want to eat the stuff that tastes good. Give me the garbage. So as a result, I had just a horrible diet for most of my life, even up until recently, really. Most of my diet was bad. When I talked about being in my 20s and breaking even, I exercised heavily, but I also drank a lot of alcohol, and I ate like garbage. I would go out and buy like a 6-pack, and a thing of gummy bears after coming home from the bar. And and then a dinner of pizza, hamburgers, nothing good. I really, up until like 30, I really ate nothing good. To me, like having a healthy meal was getting like, I don't know, like lemongrass chicken at the Thai place or something, the sugary sauce and all that. That to me was like the healthiest thing I would eat. So the probably the most difficult experiment I've done is eating healthy, and it's been gradual itself. It started with eating more salads, a Caesar salad, because that's so fucking healthy, like just like lettuce and like some thick sauce with, it's not great for you at all. It's pretty much nothing. But still, starting with things like that and building, and then I've just added and change things gradually, and like now I'm at a point where I'm having mostly a raw diet, raw vegetables, a lot of broccoli, like tons of broccoli, carrots, and raw almonds, grilled chicken, maybe beef once a week, salmon when I can afford it, that kind of thing. And it's been a very gradual process. And if I had set out to be like, I'm going to change my life and be healthy tomorrow, it's only health food from now on, I wouldn't have been able to do this. But it's been gradually adding things and taking other things away, trying things and, finding out whether it works for me or not. And I don't mind that it's boring, because I see a lot of people out there, and like, the attitudes they have toward food sort of motivate me. It's a very spoiled attitude. And that sort of spoiled attitude, like when you see the way most people behave in a restaurant, the way they treat service people, how particular they can be about food that is really, they'll order something and then be so particular about the smallest thing in it. And it's like, that motivates me to be more disciplined. That motivates me to like stick to what I'm doing right now. Because I think something is wrong with us as a people, that there are this many of us out there. And I'm not looking down. This is me being judgmental. I channel that judgment into just like fueling my own discipline. 'Cause, it's difficult because that is a good test. I mean, when you see somebody being truly spoiled in a restaurant or something like that, being extremely demanding of the staff there over some real small, discrepancy in their food, or like, "It's better over there," you know, "The the such and such is sweeter over across the street. Take it back, just take it back." Like you see people's attitudes, and I think that should motivate you. If that bothers you, that should motivate you to form a discipline to experiment with other things. I don't know. That's just how I think. But I would say treat it like an experiment. Treat it all like an experiment. And this is yet another self-congratulatory video, but it's through hard work. I feel like I'm only explaining. Or sorry, I'm describing. Thinking about the Sun City Girls, that band. I always think of they had a lyric that was explanations only come from liars, descriptions will do. And I feel like this is just a description of what I've done. I'm not trying to explain. I'm not trying to pat myself on the back or rest on my laurels, because I know better than anybody. There's a lot of hard work to do for myself. But treat it like an experiment. Gradually add things. Don't treat it like, I've got to do this and have this exact result and maintain it. Just be like, I'm going to try this out. And if you try it out, and you should treat anything like that. I mean, like, that's what happened to me with just even dietary stuff. Like, as a kid, I was terrified of food. A little, like, talking about how bad my diet was growing up, I was absolutely terrified of food. I remember going to an Indian restaurant with my ex-girlfriend, like when I was like 21, and I was terrified to try it. And thinking back on it, it's like Indian food's like candy. You're basically like eating like chicken, in this like candy sauce. It's extremely good. And it's not great for you or anything, but like, I was terrified to eat it, and then I was like, well, I'll try it. And that's what we do with those things. I'll try it. And we have that attitude. We're willing to try things. We're willing to treat things like an experiment, often when it's self-destructive. Be like, oh, well, I'll try dating this person who I know is going to do something horrible to me. I'll try, drinking. I'll try that drug. And, at best, you're going to like maybe have a little fun with it, or like, it'll help you do something. But for the most part, that there's just as high of a chance of addiction, or like having something horrible happen. But we don't often take that mindset with positive things. We don't often take that experimental mindset with making positive life changes. And it's benefited me immensely. That's what I will say. It has benefited me immensely, and I don't see myself looking back. So I would recommend, if you're somebody who does want to do something that people benefit from, but you're afraid that you won't be able to commit to it, or don't really know if it'll fit into your life, treat it like a little experiment and try it.